So we're excited to be with you today and want to get kicked off with some introductions. My name is Shelley Caldwell. I'm one of the directors here at Markle, specifically for our managed services. Been fortunate to be here for 19 years. My job inside the organization is to just come alongside of our customers and help them solve their business problems. So with that, I'll hand the virtual baton over to Ben Bowman.
Thanks, Shelley. My name is Ben Bowman. I'm the General Manager of Security here at Marco. I have the privilege of overseeing our SOC, NOC, and our consulting services practice, which is basically everything compliance. So great to be here today and talk about this topic. Patrick, I'll hand it over to you.
Patrick Foy, Consulting Services Manager here. So as Ben mentioned, we deal with compliance, but really it's more of a governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC focused division. I'm in charge of managing the virtual CISOs and virtual CIOs. Pleasure to be here, and I'll turn it back over to you, Sean.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. So what's a webinar without a couple polls, like Kim said? So we're going to get going to our first one. So get ready to provide some answers for us. We're grateful because we want to get to know you a little bit more. So here's a question. Who would lead your incident response if a breach would happen today? Looks like we got some questions coming or answers coming in, so that's great. You know, this question isn't always talked about until there's something fishy going on, right? So it's good to talk about it with your team members.
Yep. So it looks like we have internal IT teams is leading the way in terms of answers. We do have someone that said they'll figure it out as they go along too. So we do have one of those. And some not sure's. So you still have about 17 seconds and counting down to finish that poll up, and then I'll share the results with everybody. And thanks for those who are participating. All right, with 5 seconds to go, Shelley, it looks like internal IT teams will be the leader when we close this poll.
Really good.
Yeah.
Thanks for those answers. It's always good, you know, the worst question to have is the one you haven't talked about. So that is certainly one. We want to make sure that we get your teams talking. So Ben, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelley. That's good information to have in there. I think that just seeing that breakout is really interesting. It'll be interesting to see after we go through this conversation how those answers might change as we go, because I think that the biggest challenge we have is not really having some of those roles and responsibilities defined. But we'll dig deeper into that as we go. Really to kick us off, though, I wanted to start with really the problem statement. Like, why are we here today? What is the thing that's driving this conversation the most? And it's really about what I and our partners like to define as the effectiveness gap. So year over year, despite spending more and more in cybersecurity at a clip of about 13% inflation rate in that time period year over year, we're seeing a 33% increase in losses from cybercrime just in the last 2023 to 2024 period alone. So that tells us that we have some issues. And really to dig into that, there are 3 components that we always look at, right? People, process, and technology. I think we've thrown technology at things for a long time. The people thing we have thrown at, but we seem to not have enough people. It's the process at the end of the day. How do we do more with less or more with what we already have in place is a big question that we have to answer. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. Shelley, yep, thank you. So organizations that are the most successful in this area, they follow a common framework. We at Marco align ourselves with the NIST cybersecurity framework, and most cybersecurity compliances and regulations like CMMC or in the banking space, they follow NIST in some degree, form, or fashion. That's the foundation for a lot of these things. If we click one more ahead here, I think that one of the biggest problems here that we have is that we've spent so much time on the left side of boom in the identify and protect phases, right? What is boom? Boom is the time that a security incident or breach does happen, right? All of our time, or at least a lot of our time, has been spent on buying technology, that new shiny penny to solve for one issue that we're looking to overcome. We need to be spending a lot more time on the right-hand side because we can spend a lot of time on addressing risk, plugging holes, remediating vulnerabilities, and we should. However, what is our plan to successfully detect, respond, and recover to an attack is something that we need to get better at as an industry. Let's go ahead and click forward one more. So where I'd like to start in that is talk about a little bit of the reasons why we have that gap, right? This is kind of a follow-on from the poll that we asked in the beginning, is that a lot of our customers, their relationships with us and your other MSPs that you may be working with are oftentimes there are some misconceptions that I would say in that incident response process. First misconception that's out there is that the MSP or the MSP will handle everything during a breach. Well, there's a big challenge with that, right? There's legal concerns that are there. There's cyber insurance concerns, public relations concerns that come up. The second misconception that's in there is that 24/7 incident response is available by default. A lot of providers don't provide this by default. You might not have 24/7 written into your agreement or into your contract with that provider. It might not include security incident response as a part of that, or there might be optional retainers that are out there that need to be procured for that purpose. The other piece is often a misconception is we're covered under our backup and DR plan. That is not always the case. I think a lot of cyber incidents, we naturally start thinking about ransomware and how that takes the entire environment offline. We're seeing less and less traditional ransomware, and it's moving in a different direction, which we'll talk more about here in a bit. A lot of cyber incident response is about extortion, data exfiltration, business email compromise, and things like that. So while disaster recovery planning is an integral part, and it is something that's oftentimes separate, incident response does not always get covered underneath that. And then the last piece here, the MSP or MSSP has a tested playbook for our business. It's true that most and the best MSSPs have tested playbooks for certain scenarios, but they're very genericized to specific incident types so that they can scale appropriately. However, what the industry is moving more towards is a consultative-based approach where we spend more time working with the customer directly because we do need to customize those response plans. How do we react when a wire fraud instance happens? Who do we engage? Well, oftentimes the customer holds those relationships, and we have to work together to facilitate that exchange of information. Some other misconceptions that exist from a customer standpoint, we hear this a lot. Hey, we signed on with you as an MSP. We signed on because we knew you'd have it all handled. We just want to kind of push that relationship to you and have everything taken care of. That is a misconception. Like for us to be successful in a partnership, which it is, between the MSP or MSSP and that customer, talking about things like, hey, when an incident happens, what is the legal ramifications? Who do we need to reach out to? From an HR standpoint, have you talked about this internally, how we would react if something is misused within the environment? We need to be having more conversations about that in an incident response plan that is, and having our customers take ownership in that in concert with us as an MSP. Another piece in here is that the service provider will communicate with regulators and law enforcement. Most regulators, they will help facilitate, most MSPs or MSSPs will help facilitate the data gathering and information sharing, but they will not take the lead on working with those regulators and law enforcement. That's for a variety of reasons, legal, liability, some other things like that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the customer is responsible and owns that relationship with those regulators and those local law enforcement providers. And then another one, our MSSP has cyber insurance coverage for us. Not a really common misconception, but it does come up often. Insurance coverage, they cover the business that they're directly a policyholder of, right? That does not extend into your other service providers. So that is something to take into consideration. And then the last one here is that the service level agreement or service level target that's in the contract guarantees resolution and not just response. Oftentimes, it does not include resolution, and incidents can take, depending on the nature of them, 1, 2 weeks, or even longer to resolve. So that's something to consider in this when developing a plan that will help you reduce that time to resolution when you work hand in hand with those providers. Go ahead and jump forward one. So this slide, I want to talk to this a little bit because this ties into cyber insurance. This is one of the more important pieces of the incident response landscape that we're talking about, and just we have to consider the insurance relationship when we are preparing for a potential incident. So my background, I spent about 6 years in community banking, and that industry is a little bit ahead of the curve when it came to regulations and cybersecurity programs and compliance and things like that. But as recent as about 5 to 6 to even 7 years ago, the thing that was preached the most, I heard all the time, was contact cyber insurance first. Now, I don't know about anyone else on the call, but if I'm in an accident on the side of the road, I'm not going to call State Farm first and get their permission to save my life, right? We got to shift as an industry to immediately responding to an incident so that we can contain or we can save the life of the patient, contain the threat, and then go from there. And that's where insurance providers are now starting to push, hey, to get the best premium, you have to have an incident response plan. In that incident response plan, you should have considerations for your cyber insurance and what they require, but we should focus on containment first. Save the life of the patient, in this case, the business, and then determine what the legal and regulatory considerations are, and then engage cyber insurance to talk about what's happened, what's occurred, and what the next steps are. So the industry is shifting.
Ben, I wanted to chime in.
Yeah.
You know, I was in a client meeting earlier this week and had a great leader, great business operator across the table from me. And I go, hey, tell me a little bit about your process of renewing your cyber insurance. And I kind of got a little bit of an eye roll. And I'm like, oh boy. And I go, hey, tell me, that's a big reaction. Tell me about it. He's like, it's 91 pages, Shelley. I don't know how to begin with some of this. So I just wanted to call it out. Like, if you're thinking about like, okay, how do we walk through this process? You're not alone. Okay. It happens quite a bit. There's a lot of words in an insurance policy that's like, how does my existing partner, my internal team, and my business all work together, and my employees all work together to make sure we're safe. So just wanted to call that out. It's a real situation, and a lot of people don't know the right steps. So thank you for walking through this.
Yeah, another piece on that, we don't have to go back on a slide, but something I'll call out here is that a lot of providers, MSPs that our customers work with, oftentimes they don't have the tie-in with the insurance provider. And that's something that is a barrier to quick resolution and better outcomes during those incidents. So at Marco, we've taken this approach where we have our team, which is internal to Marco, that does the front end servicing of those security needs and those incidents themselves from a hands-on perspective. But we also have our partners that are pre-approved in cyber insurance panels. And that allows us to have this closed loop that helps us through that process. So when an incident occurs, we're all already kind of on the same page, right? We're leveraging the same tools, we're leveraging the same partners, and we have those relationships already built, and it helps speed up that process and create that better outcome. So I'll keep going on that trend here, just talking a little bit about cyber insurance itself. Like, what's the future look like? If I asked everyone to raise their hand in this room, I'd probably get 100% on this. AI, have you talked about it? Absolutely, everyone's talked about it. It is an emerging technology risk, right? Underwriters are starting to look at this and seeing how companies are approaching AI and what their security program is doing to encompass AI as a technology. The future of this is going to be just looking at, through the looking glass. Businesses will have individual agents for individual tasks that they'll be able to download off of a store. That's not too long in the future, just looking at some of those providers out there. So then the question becomes, inside of that individual AI agent for this task, is there cross-pollination between something like purchasing and accounts payable? Are those work processes somehow transferring between those two agents? Like, there are different things that are coming into play, and we're starting to get a better idea of what those security programs need to look like to encompass it. but underwriters are starting to scrutinize it quite heavily. Next, premium reduction strategies. I think this is just a continuing trend, right? They're still encouraging to adopt multi-layered defenses like multi-factor authentication, EDR, things of that nature. Documenting your risk management practices. A big one that's more common now is demonstrating you have 24/7 coverage for detecting and responding to an incident, vulnerability remediation, and tabletop exercises. Actually testing your plan so that you can turn cold thinking, where you access that plan, into hot thinking, where you don't have to access that plan during an incident. And then trends to watch. Ransomware, social engineering, those things are definitely continuing to drive some insurance trends. What I'd say is we talk through this, ransomware oftentimes still gets lumped into the same bucket as data exfiltration, which is an increasing trend or an increasing category of cyber incident that we run into. Few other things here: market growth and stabilization. Cyber insurance market continues to climb. I think that's not a shock for anyone. They are declining more applications for policies. That is one thing. But also with that, more people are applying for insurance around cyber. The thing behind this is I do see more organizations getting better at this. They're starting to add their incident response plan. They're starting to put in some of those multi-layered defenses. So there are more people that are procuring policies. More are getting denied at the same time, though. So we are seeing a market correction, and insurance is really helping drive some of that. Love it or hate it. Stricter underwriting, I think I just kind of mentioned that a little bit. But then the supply chain and cloud risk focus. We're so decentralized right now, right? Not everything is behind your four walls inside your data center. It's going out to the cloud. And I think the big thing here is shadow IT is going to become a much bigger concern in the future, because your end users, I guarantee, are talking about how to use AI, and they're finding their own solutions. So the next piece here, top 6 cyber incident types. Ransomware and data extortion continue to be at the top of the list here. What I will say in this is that we're seeing less on our end of the traditional ransomware, where all your endpoints and your servers get encrypted. Data extortion is another piece of that. And they're kind of being lumped together in a lot of cases, because when a threat actor steals your data, they will still go and say, we are going to release this on the dark web or the internet or to the public, whatever, and they'll provide evidence that they have that data, and then demand a ransom to not release that data. So it's still similar in a style, but they get lumped together. And then business email compromise. Last month we had a record number of business email compromise events coming into our SOC, so that's continuing to climb. We can jump forward one here. From a industry perspective, going back to ransomware and data extortion, manufacturing is leading the pack right now. And the reason for that is, by and large, is that manufacturing historically has not had a lot of regulations to adhere to, not a lot of compliance that they've had to adhere to from a traditional cybersecurity perspective. Like in community banking, you had the FIEC. In healthcare, you have HIPAA to a certain extent. Manufacturing has not had that requirement for a long time, so they're an easy target, unfortunately. I'll say it. I see that maybe changing in the future, though, as we keep going forward with the announcement of CMMC now going on contracts and things like that. Root cause. So believe it or not, we are seeing a ton of external exposure leading to incidents. It used to be targeting the user account, and that still happens. I mentioned BEC before. In the 2 traditional ransomware cases that I have seen in the past 2 years for our customers, that's a pretty low amount. Both of them have leveraged a misconfigured firewall or a firewall with a vulnerability in it, where there might be a user account that was added that's, hey, we have this guest VPN and we haven't added MFA to it, or we forgot it was there. And that's how they get in, they gain a foothold. And then what they do, instead of encrypting your endpoint or your server, they'll target your VMware data store, the virtual infrastructure that your endpoint technology like a CrowdStrike or a Microsoft Defender cannot see. So that perimeter is becoming very critical yet again, even with our lessening reliance on on-premise infrastructure. And then on this, just to break it down by the numbers, 40% of ransomware is linked to external remote access. That is significantly more than phishing. We see on this list here, 6.8% of ransomware causes or incidents are from phishing these days, 5.1 from social engineering, right? If you lump those bottom three together, which are kind of all in the similar bucket, you're looking at less than 15%. Most of it's coming from external remote access or external exploits at the firewall level. So visibility into the network is becoming more key, and then continuing to look at the configuration of the firewall is extremely important. Next piece of this, so carrying on from the external exploit of things, vulnerability management as a practice is integral, not just from a protection mechanism, right? We talk about identify and protect earlier on in that NIST framework. When we look at detection, response, and recovery, oftentimes this vulnerability management lifecycle is critical in the incident response process. One of the first things they'll do is, as a digital forensics firm, identify how the attacker got in, find which vulnerabilities were exploited, and then branch out from there to identify what other endpoints or what other systems might be vulnerable to attack at a critical level. So most organizations, they're starting to have a tool in place that does the discovery and prioritization of those vulnerabilities for themselves, but they're lacking on the back half of that. So what we want to do is have a complete process in place so that when those vulnerabilities are identified, we have a cycle to resolve those, so that when we go through an actual incident, we have less of an attack surface to sift through. So this helps inform our own team on how to protect our environment, but it also helps speed up the incident response process after an incident actually occurs.
Ben, this is really important to touch on, right? Because we're seeing the importance on life cycle and just making sure that overall what's on the network, like we're understanding what's on it and that we're identifying where they are vulnerable. So many IT team members though are so busy, right? Like they just have a lot of things going on. So just again, wanted to call out, I got a, and I'm not sure if you heard the team's message, but I got a message like, Shelley, how do they manage all of this again? I mean, it consistently is a root issue inside of businesses. You know, as we continue to add more things to an organization or add more technology, how are we managing it and making sure from start to finish, we have a really good plan in place. So just want to call that out because I had a sideline. Instant message and question from one of our team members.
Sure. I'll make a comment on that first piece. There's the discover, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't protect what you don't know about. And having vulnerability management in place tells you when there are devices on your network that you don't have cataloged, you don't have in your inventory. And then beyond that, when you go through an incident, you can leverage that tool to say, hey, here's all the devices that are active in my network. And it helps speed up remediation because then we don't have to load a tool. We don't have to do that additional discovery to find that rogue access point that someone in a warehouse decided to install. No kidding, that's happened before. I've seen it. Someone installed their own internet connection in a warehouse once. Different story, different day. But anyway, we can keep moving forward.
I think the important thing is like continuously rescanning, right? Making sure that things are in a really good state and reaching out for help if you need something.
This is the last point I'm going to make before I hand it off to Patrick. So from prevention recovery, this is just reiterating on what I said before. But vulnerability scanning itself informs detection. It helps understand where those vulnerabilities are, what the exploits could be, and helps inform what could happen in your environment. So if these vulnerabilities exist, we're more likely to be hit by this specific type of an attack. When that detection occurs, it informs remediation, enables rapid containment, so we know what is in the environment and what we have to contain, and then how to recover from that. And then on that, incident response validates exploited vulnerabilities and drives corrective action. One of the things that come out of those response engagements with insurance carriers is corrective action. They will talk about rehydration, modernization, plugging the holes, and those types of things. So it's definitely a cyclical process, and those things are very intertwined.
Really good update on, some of the misconceptions, the vulnerabilities, what we're seeing. It's really helpful to make sure we're just constantly aware of all the different changes. So, we've been on this conversation for 26 minutes. It's like the threat landscape is changing every minute. So it's important for sure. All right. So poll number 2, Kim, what do we got?
It's open. So have you included your MSP or your MSSP in your IR planning? Yes, no, or unsure. So this will be an interesting one now that we've talked about all of these different things, Shelley. It looks like, oh, it's pretty split right now between yes, no, and unsure. So we'll see how it ends up when we get to the end.
I know we're going to talk about incident response planning and some tabletop. I'm not stealing your thunder, Patrick, because I know you're going to do excellent. But recently, we've been meeting with a new partnership, if they pick us, and sat across the table from an executive leader and was really struggling with just overall, like how do we manage the importance of security is not just an IT issue anymore, it's a business issue. So this next topic is going to be a really good one. So, all right, Kim, how do we do?
Yeah, I'm closing it right now. So it looks like we'll go ahead and share those answers with everyone. So it looks like we had 10 yeses, no's, and then some unsures.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks again for the answers, everyone. All right, going to hand it over to Patrick. Tell us about incident response planning.
Right. Well, thanks, Shelley. So yeah, as Ben was mentioning, right, like you're talking about incident response planning and a lot of the things that we're seeing as far as trends there. So today I want to take some time as well to go through and really talk about, how have plans evolved over the last couple of years, as well as looking to the future. What are the considerations that we should be thinking about? So I wish I could start with some better news here, but unfortunately, costs continue to rise. Imagine that. So the trends continue. You can see here that we have an overall for 2025 or about 9% increase over 2024 from the year before. Now, we all know that costs rise with a lot of these year over year. The question though is kind of why does that continue to happen? Specifically, we talked about some of the things where maybe we can lower the costs, but really what it's coming down to is the fact that there's a rapidly evolving landscape out there. Ransomware has been alluded to, right? Traditional ransomware is also changing to more data exfiltration. This is a business for criminals, right? So they're always trying to get a leg up. It's a little bit of a cat and mouse between those developing the tools to detect it, and obviously those that are trying to take advantage of it. So one of the things, and I'm sure hot button issue here is obviously AI is a big part of that, right? What we're seeing is the ability for AI to come in to expedite a lot of different types of attacks that are out there, especially when it comes to impersonations or social engineering. That's where we're starting to see a lot of the trending go, where it's not necessarily how many attacks can I throw out, it's the quality of the attack. So a lot of the indicators that were used originally that we could easily spot, misspellings, different types of naming conventions, bad watermarks, it's getting harder and harder to detect those these days. So obviously, for more success, it's driving those costs up. And as has mentioned before too about cyber insurance, that's a direct correlation to why those costs are going up. So kind of just the trends that we're seeing as far as that goes. So, but when it comes to planning, where do we sit with that? And, as you can see, based off of polling, based off of a lot of what you're probably talking about with your peers in the industry, is everybody has an incident response plan to some extent. Now, are incident response plans all created equal? The answer to that is obviously no, right? What we want to do is make sure that we're looking at our incident response plan and make sure that it works for our business. So a lot of the time we take the initial investment, we go out there, we hire a consultant, or we get online, we try to find best practices, and we throw together an incident response plan. It's very focused on IT, how they're going to respond, maybe a call tree or so. And a lot of time we feel good about that, and you should, right? Like that's a big step. The thing is, it tends to sit on a shelf afterwards. And really, when it comes to incident response planning, we're not looking at building binders, but we're looking at building behaviors. So some of those things that we need to consider is time over time, what is kind of, if you will, the drift on the plan, right? People leave from the organization. You maybe have others that are going to be, if somebody were out, do you have alternates identified, right? We were talking about AI, so AI gets brought into this. Those are new tools that are specifically system related that can open up a large attack surface that needs to be considered. Do we have playbooks for those new tools? Have we considered the risks for those new tools? We're going to talk about data classification in a little bit here, but do we understand where our data lives and how to protect it? So these are the types of things where, having that initial incident response plan is good. It's a great start, but really it's a journey that we have to be on. As they were saying earlier, it's cyclical. It is, it's an annual review. It's not just updating the names and the numbers, but it really is looking at the business as a whole and saying, hey, where are we vulnerable with that? And obviously, this is where we get into, testing out that plan. And really that is where you are going to find a ton of value when it comes to this, is having a formal test and going through that. Does that always mean hiring a third party? No. A lot of the time, internal testing can be just as effective when it comes to how are you going to respond to something. However, objectively, from a business level, it's always good to bring in a third party every so often, right, to get that outside perspective. A lot of the time we can easily get blinded by what's going on in our own worlds, in our own organizations, what's important to us, where our priorities are. And we don't have necessarily all of the best case of the business in mind with that. So, bringing in a consultant can obviously look at that from more of a business continuity perspective as well. So,
Patrick, can I interrupt you? So this is, while you're talking through this, I'm looking at this slide title and it says the consequences of an untended plan. So that thing is dusty, right? Like you're pulling it off the shelf and you're looking at it and you're like, oh man, haven't updated this since 2020 or 2021, maybe because 2020 really caused a lot of, hey, we aren't prepared for some of this. Recently sat, again, I guess from a industry standpoint, it was an agriculture organization, and they do critical infrastructure for the ag industry, and had the executive around a table. We were on site this time. They asked us for some help. Just start with talking about incident response planning, and had his key leaders at the table. And during the conversation about, hey, if we're down, what are the systems that need to come up and in what order? And, because they had, 10, 12-ish leaders around the table, boy, it sparked an unexpected debate. And it really opened the eyes of the executive team, like, oh boy, okay, we need to have some cross-functional alignment discussions and document the priorities. So when something does occur, we're in a good position. So just wanted to share that was I kind of sat back and I'm like, ooh, that conversation started something. But again, this is common, and you got to have those healthy conversations. Nothing wrong with it.
No, nothing at all. In fact, it's only going to make your business stronger. It's only going to provide more trust with that. A lot of the times with these plans too, it's very focused on IT. We don't always consider who are the supporting players. A lot of the time you're looking at, your legal team is going to be a part of that. The HR department, how are they going to fit in with that? Maybe there's some sort of public relations or marketing that's going to be your outreach to your customers. What about third parties and how you interact with them versus on their SLAs? So that was mentioned before too, kind of in our poll here. So with your plan, there's a lot of room to grow, and incorporating that and building that into it, and then having a chance to test it really with, some sort of exercise there and see what those gaps are and have those insights. To your point, Shelley, right? Like, it's eye-opening, not just for the IT team, for the business itself. Where do those risks lie for us, and how can we mitigate that, or how can we marginalize or minimize some of that risk there? So, but when we look ahead, if you want to go to the next slide here. Oh, one too many.
Oh, sorry, hit the button too many times. Thanks, man.
There we go. So looking at emerging threats, like I said, that's kind of where we find ourselves. We want to make sure we're doing good maintenance, but really looking ahead, what is out there? And it's not to beat up AI, but I mean, AI is a revolutionary type of technology, as I alluded to a little bit in the previous slide, right? We're really seeing a lot of it involved with social engineering to, the business email compromises. I've even seen it where they've taken voice snippets based off of recordings before, and AI voice is able to impersonate, potentially a senior executive. How many people have been watching the news lately and saw that the #1 Billboard country song for the week is an AI band? I mean, it wasn't even discovered until recently that was the case. So you look at AI from a year ago, between like Sora 2 coming out and some of these big technology advances with imaging and sound, it's getting harder and harder to tell reality from fantasy here. So well, things we want to really kind of consider is when we're bringing in AI into our environments, as I'm sure most of you are probably already have or are thinking about, we really want to look at it from the incident response standpoint, as I mentioned before, which is, okay, this is a new system. There's new risks associated with it. Do we have, updated scenarios for this? Do we have playbooks that are in place to handle this with our team? Maybe we don't have the expertise in-house. Have we thought about bringing in a third party or some sort of MSSP? Maybe we need to shift over. Are we looking at our vendors and what would the risk is there? So with that, you also want to have to, how are you going to respond to those types of scenarios with that? Like I said, if you don't have it in-house, do you have a third party? When you look at also too, the relevant and resilience that you have here, you need to maybe bring in more technology with that to help out with that. I'll get into that. A lot of that begins with foundational, but also technology can be kind of a game changer with that when you start talking about like data classification, right? How do our AI systems ingest that? And not only for AI, but for data classification for ransomware, right? Do I know where that pivotal data lies, and how do I protect that so that if I do get ransomware, maybe I don't have to worry as much, or maybe I already know where that data is on my system. So I know that, hey, just because they got this one drive or this part of this share, right? There was no pivotal data that was there. There was no protected data or regulated data, right? That does make a difference when you talk to your insurance company and have to go with them for a breach coach. So yeah, kind of the segue into that data inventory, right? Like, why is it important? Well, obviously, because strong security starts with understanding where that data is, right? Where are your crown jewels within your organization? Whether that's intellectual property, whether that's regulated information such as like PII or PHI that you may need to protect. It could even be something that's maybe not regulated but still sensitive in nature, like financial data. Maybe it's competitor analysis, right? There's different parts of data and different regulations that you need to know about as far as what protections you need to put in place. So obviously, if you don't know where it is, you can't protect it. If you don't know what you're supposed to be protect, you can't do that either, right? So obviously, looking at having at least where does our critical data lie and understanding that and having an inventory of not just what is the critical data, but what repositories is it in? Are they virtual, logical? Are they also printed out too, right? And a lot of the times you may have it to where HR is like, hey, we're using some sort of SaaS platform. Do they have a local storage of that as well? Are you aware of that? Right? Like, so those are, once again, this is where having an inventory, understanding who data owners are, having mappings, of where that is, and an understanding really goes a long way for the organization to provide a protective barrier and when it comes to risk, be able to respond appropriately to that.
Patrick, really good overview. I do want to make a call out here because you may be thinking about this data inventory and classification. Well, artificial intelligence, whether it be Copilot, whether it be Claude, or whether it be your core application now has AI in it. If you need help with understanding like how are we using artificial intelligence today, we can help you. I just wanted to share that with you. So if you have interest or any sort of questions around it, we lead with an assessment that understands where inside your organization do you have artificial intelligence? How are you using it today? And then helping you with these really key steps. There's 3 of them. That's our approach. That then helps you with data inventory, classification, but putting together a really good plan to making sure the business is secure before you throw down the lever, make sure that we are transforming our organization with automation. So just wanted to call that out, plant a seed there, and just know that we're here to help and support you. So really good call out that protecting the data you have inside your organization, or even knowing the data that you have inside your organization, is key.
Yeah. And maybe one other thing just on that before you move on with the slide there is a lot of customers that I'm talking to with AI, especially, they're looking at DLP. They're looking at how do I protect that data, and they're looking at the tools, particularly tools that Microsoft has like Purview, Purview, for those of you that may not be aware of it, it can put labels on data, right? So if you have classified data or you have sensitive data, right, you can label that within the organization. It's a great tool. There's a lot of functionality there. The issue that a lot of them run into is they don't have good data inventories and they don't have classification policies. So they don't, the labels are there, the tool is there, but they don't have the foundational knowledge that they need to utilize the tool effectively to really provide the value that they're looking for. So either way, you know, whether it's going with incident response here or AI or other technologies, it's always good to understand where is that critical data and what is that critical data within the organization. So, you know, and all the things we're talking about today, right, like incident response and data, all this really comes under an umbrella, if you will, of business continuity. So this is where I tend to empathize with the IT teams a little bit, and going back to Shelley's story before too. I think IT really has a good grasp on incident response, right? They understand their roles. I think for the other parts of the organization, though, it can be a little bit more challenging. You know, they want to know what's going on. You can have good communication plans, but you know, the first question here: if our systems went down from attack, could we keep serving our customers and running our businesses? I think there's a lot that is there to unpack with that. Do you have alternative working processes if you're down for an extended period of time? What if your backups, you know, are corrupted or they're inaccessible? And backups don't always satisfy everything here when it comes to that. There could be reputational damage from being down from a long amount of time as well. What does it look like if it's a third party that takes you down, right? CrowdStrike, notorious last year for taking down quite a little bit. You had the other day with Cloudflare. So a lot of these large ISPs out there or service providers, you know, they're showing susceptibility too. Do you have a plan for that? If that's the case, you could even have it to where your ISP line is cut. I just moved this summer. I think my line's been cut 3 times by construction as they were working on the road out there. So, you know, there's always the redundancy that you want to have with that. And it's not saying that you're not prepared. You probably do have backups, but have you tested that once again? So kind of going into that next question there, do we have backups or other way to store important data, right? This is always when you're looking at redundancy. And it's a very general question. I'd like to focus maybe on with that, kind of the question after that with the allowable downtime, the maximum allowable downtime. But do you have any kind of business impact analysis, right? Have you identified critical systems and not just, right, the core functions to get the internet back up, but critical business systems that could be like your IRP, your CRM, whatever that may be, those types of systems and how long they can be down for. If you're manufacturing, you know, how long can your production line be down for, right? Accessibility becomes much more of a concern for those types of businesses than, say, you know, confidentiality, which we typically tend to go off of in the triad there. So looking at those types of different risks, understanding what the backups are, but really, yeah, it's once again having a good plan, understanding where you're vulnerable, where those risks are, especially to the business itself, and then building redundancy is really going to provide you that benefit that you need in order to execute on your plan then alongside of that. So yeah, kind of going into the last one here, I lumped this all together. I realized that as I went through it, but the important thing to consider here is if you don't have, you know, those critical systems, if you don't understand what the redundancy requirements are, how they need to be brought back up if they were to go down, right? There's interdependencies that could be there to where they have to be brought up in a certain way. That's where that testing really comes into it. You know, something like business impact analysis can go a long way with helping you identify that and getting started down the path of having a really robust business continuity plan to respond to all sorts of incidents that may happen. They're not always a cyber attack, right? Like I said, somebody could cut a line and that brings you down too. So
I have a really quick story from the trenches here I'd like to share before I got into the rest of this piece here. But this ties back into the untended response plan, but also ties into like adapting to new scenarios as well as business continuity. So 2019, I'm working for a community bank at that time. I'm their information security officer. I also have some operational duties in that where I was developing their business continuity plan. And this is no joke. 2019, we get audited, and one of the requirements is on that audit is to have a pandemic preparedness plan. I wrote that plan in 2019 thinking that I would never have to use that. And what happened a year later? Well, it got used, right? We all know that. So when we talk about business continuity planning, disaster recovery plan, or just having an incident response plan, and then talking this through with your provider, whoever that may be, it will happen. Like Murphy's Law, like consider that. At some point, you're going to be in an incident scenario and you're going to ask who's doing what. And you're going to have to refer back to that plan. Well, testing that can help, and changing that cold thinking where you have to, again, look at that plan, converting it into hot thinking will really help you when you get into that scenario.
Fantastic story, by the way, because here's the thing, whether you're 5 employees or whether you're 500 or 1,000 plus employees, the same process and like this importance, or this really important thing to manage and measure, like what we're going to talk about here, is just sized a little bit differently, right? Maybe not as many applications, or not as many people, or not as much, revenue streams coming into the organization. But I did want to call out, it's such an applicable conversation. I often say, like, hey, practice makes perfect, right? Making sure there are all sorts of different emergency preparedness scenarios you can test and have a good conversation on. So great story, boy. I bet you felt, you're like, yeah, I actually have one ready to go, right? I felt pretty proud about that moment.
It was something.
Yeah, I would say so. All right, manage and measure.
Yeah. So just wrapping up with manage and measure, right? We talked about a lot of different things today. Talked about our IRP. We talked about doing some testing, right, to future threats. I really just wanted to spend just a moment on, what does the day-to-day look like? And oftentimes it can be a challenge sometimes for IT managers and folks like that are having to show value within their systems and show where are we making progress? How have we shown growth over time? So just a couple of things that I typically start out with that when in the vein of incident response, right? So the mean time to detect, right? The mean time to respond and recover, patch and update completion rates. That's always one that's kind of here or there. Part of that is a lot of the time there may be systems that you can't patch at that current time, so they linger out there. But I think it's still good to show, where is the progress being made? And I would encourage you, if you are doing that, or if you do run up against that, right, having a policy in place can really go a long way, because then you can have exceptions to that and you can remove those metrics, or you can make that into a separate metric itself, so that leadership can understand, right, the day-to-day with what we can do versus what we maybe can't do because there's a certain risk associated with it. MFA coverage is another really good one. Obviously, that ties right in a lot of the time with insurance, making sure that you are actually 100% covered, because if insurance were to come in and they were to start poking around potentially, and they found, maybe to Ben's point about shadow IT, right, there could be liability there. You could say we had 100%, and they could say, well, you didn't have these couple. So another really good reason to have solid inventory out there. But MFA coverage is the big one. And then obviously, everybody's doing, for the most part, that phishing and security awareness. Always good to have folks in front of a screen, seeing what the latest and greatest is out there, making sure your employees, who are your biggest, sometimes say, vulnerability, but I would say your biggest asset too, because those are the folks that are going to notice when things are out of place. That even with AI, they're like, hey, something just sounds off about this conversation. That see something, say something mentality is really what we need to make sure that we value and foster. So yeah, that takes me to the end of my presentation. So Shelley, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Before I move on from this slide, I'm a visual person, meaning before I came into the IT and security industry, I didn't know what some of these acronyms were. And if you look at this slide, the MTTD, the MFA, obviously I know what those are now, but if you look at the status, in the green and the yellow and the red, so many questions that we get from business leaders who are working hard to translate the really technical things to, like, how do we drive our business outcomes? This is a really good visual. So if you need some help, or you want a copy of this, I know Kim, this is something that we're going to send out And you can certainly use that as a really good, hey, where were we 2 years ago with our security and risk management? And where are we now and what's the progress? Really good slide to show them. So, all right. So wrapping up, we got about, call it 9 minutes before we wrap up for the day. So what I want to do next is, we talked about a lot of concepts. There's a lot of changes going on. Now, how do we start applying what we're learning? And I want to just raise our hand and be like, we'd love to help you. And how we do that is we want to meet you where you are inside your organization and help you put together a modular approach on how you manage your risk. And Marco has deployed what we call, and you see another acronym on that slide called ACE. It's Accelerated Client Experience, okay? Now, what that is if you look at the pyramid, down at the bottom of that pyramid, it says Jumpstart. If you want to start practicing what your incident response plan is, or even getting one documented, we want to talk to you about the incident response and just what we call breach readiness. So getting ready for any sort of security event that's occurring. And we want to pull in key leaders in your organization to help you. The next step in that pyramid is called acceleration. All right. Acceleration is where we link arms together with your organization and put together a cyber operations plan. So we take the tools that you're using. You can see some of the logos, Microsoft, Arctic Wolf. We can even leverage a lot of the Microsoft, conditional access or security tools that you have already subscribed to. And we walk through to be sure we have a really good strategy in place that really meets what Ben and Patrick talked about earlier. And then finally, what we want to do is just make sure that there are unique things for businesses, because their businesses are unique in general. So we're here to provide, hey, whether or not you want to take ownership of managing the risk right out of the gate, or if you'd like us to, or if you'd like a collaboration of effort, we certainly can. Now, if you look on the screen, Arctic Wolf is on the screen. We're really excited. We've been partners for a little while now, but we are better together, meaning that we are working together in providing managed detection and response. We want to be able to provide reporting to you. We want to consistently provide a good assessment of how is your security working. Also, discussions around incident response and just overall making sure you have a really solid security program. So I just want to toss it over to Ben. Anything else you want to call out on this slide, or anything else to add here with our awesome partnership with Arctic Wolf?
Yeah, maybe just a quick note here around specifically full service incident response. We've talked a lot about that today, and I alluded to this earlier, where there's been an efficiency issue and a disconnect in the industry. A lot of providers have tools where they say, we're going to be your security operations center. They'll detect something, they'll do everything right. They'll, say, we've got this alert. They'll either do a little containment, and then they'll pass it on to you as a customer and say, hey, we've detected this occurs. And a lot of times, a lot of providers will say, you might want to contact cyber insurance. And what happens in that scenario, despite that MSSP doing everything right in that detection response process, the provider then gets out of the conversation. The insurance provider then takes over that conversation. They bring in a third party and all of this other stuff. And what you have is a very decentralized approach. And it takes longer to get to a resolution. It takes longer to get to the information. So in this partnership, what this has enabled us to do is leverage their SOC from a back-end perspective. Our team is hands-on remediation, and then they have an incident response and digital forensics team pre-approved by over 30 cyber insurance providers. So when we deploy in with this, we've got a closed loop circuit where everybody is able to interact in that same response process, accelerating remediation and getting to a better outcome overall. So that we're, just better communication, better documentation, and lower payouts on incidents themselves if those do occur. So I just thought I'd add that little note in there.
Great vote of the conversation for sure. Thank you, Ben. All right, so got a couple of messages going on now in the chat, also side chat here. Got an email actually from one of our participants too, saying, hey, how do we get started with some of this incident response? And just overall, hey, where do we go from here? Like, we need some help. we would recommend that your first step be that breach readiness. Just take the first step inside of the accelerated client experience, and how you do that. We'd love to get to know you a little bit. If you're not already a customer, those of you that are a customer on the webinar, thank you for attending today. Hope you took some good nuggets away. But we have a cyber health survey, and I put the link. And Kim, I'm wondering if you could drop that into the chat for me. I would be grateful. But if you do have your cell phone, go ahead and scan that QR code. It is safe. That's why I put the link there. But there's a series of questions that helps us gather some really good intelligence and data on your organization. And we can meet you where you're at and put together a solid plan depending on budget, timeline, your excellent IT team members, in your organization, and we can help you in the path forward. I wanted to open up. Do we have any questions?
We do actually. So,
Okay.
and Shelley, I thought this would be a good one. First one for you. There is a plethora of MSP, MSSP offerings out there, and they all look different. So if a company is to vet one, what would be some of the top questions that you ask? And I thought this would be perfect for you.
Oh man, I would spend some time getting to know the organization as a whole. How many employees do they have? What kind of leadership is going on? How do they stay innovative inside of the different changes inside of the cybersecurity landscape?